Winter settled over the frontier with the quiet authority of something ancient, something that remembered the world before people dared to carve little squares of life into its untouched expanse. Snow drifted down in slow, unhurried spirals, soft as exhaled prayer, layering itself over the Hart homestead until the rooflines blurred and the fences resembled half-buried ribs. Evelyn moved through it all like a ghost wandering the last place she had ever called home. Her breath rose pale in the frigid barn, her fingers trembling as she scattered the last of the feed for the one remaining horse. The creature nickered weakly, as if sensing the thinness of her hope. She whispered an apology into the cold, each word almost swallowed by the wind. The barn felt larger now that her life had emptied out. Nathan's tools still hung in their places, untouched since the fever took him. His coat still rested on a peg, stiff with old dust. Evelyn could not bring herself to remove it. Some small, fragile part of her believed the world might collapse entirely if she disturbed even one memory. She wrapped her arms around herself as the wind moaned through the loose slats, sounding too much like grief. Hunger crept into her bones, a slow, inevitable companion. She had not eaten since dawn. There had been nothing left to eat. A winter like this demanded company or death. Evelyn had neither. And she suspected the winter had already made its choice. She bent to pick up the fallen bucket near the horse's stall, but her knees buckled from exhaustion. She caught herself on the wooden beam and closed her eyes, breathing hard. She had not cried in days. Crying wasted warmth. Crying wasted strength. Crying changed nothing. So she held the ache tight, and let it coil in her chest like a small animal refusing to die. That was when she felt it. Another presence, quiet as snowfall, heavy as a heartbeat in the dark. The horse's ears twitched. A low, uncertain rumble left its throat, the sound of a creature torn between fear and recognition. Evelyn straightened slowly, fingers hovering near the old pitchfork, though she doubted she had the strength to lift it, let alone wield it. She scanned the dim barn, eyes adjusting to the shifting shadows. The door had not opened. She would have heard it. Yet someone was here. A breath of warm air stirred near the rafters, carrying the musk of leather, earth, and something wild. Evelyn's pulse thudded painfully in her ears. She backed toward the light seeping through the cracks, but froze when a massive silhouette stepped out from behind the stacked hay bales. The figure moved with unhurried certainty, each step silent, deliberate, like a mountain learning to walk. Snow still clung to him, melting into droplets that traced down bronzed, battle-scarred skin. He wore no shirt, only a necklace of carved bone resting against a chest built by hardship and survival. An Apache. A giant of one. Evelyn could not speak. The cold air seemed to press against her throat, sealing off every sound. She had heard stories in town, whispers of warriors who could appear without a trace, shadows who walked the border between myth and man. But she had never imagined one standing inches from her, his dark hair loose over his shoulders, his expression unreadable. His eyes were the startling part. Steady, calm, as if he had known she would be here. As if he had been waiting. For several long heartbeats, the world held its breath. He did not reach for her. Did not raise a weapon. He simply looked at her with a depth she did not understand. A depth that made her feel both seen and exposed. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the pitchfork. It felt ridiculous. Useless. Still, she clung to it, not as a shield, but as a tether to whatever courage remained inside her worn, winter-hollowed body. The giant shifted his gaze to the horse, taking in its thin ribs, the empty trough, the failing warmth of the barn. When his eyes returned to Evelyn, something had changed. The softness was gone. Determination settled in its place, firm as a vow. He stepped closer. She did not move. Perhaps she could not. His voice, when it finally came, rolled through the barn like distant thunder softened by snowfall. Deep, low, unexpectedly gentle. Each word carried the weight of decision, not threat. "Get your things." Evelyn's breath caught. She stared at him, unable to form sense from the command. Her heartbeat rushed into her ears, drowning out logic, drowning out fear. People did not simply say such things. Not to widows. Not in the dead of winter. Not in a world where kindness had become a luxury no one could afford. "You're staying with me." The words settled over her like a blanket thrown across trembling shoulders, confusing in their certainty, startling in their warmth. Something inside her, some fragile shard of resolve, fractured at the tone rather than the meaning. He sounded as if he had already chosen to protect her, as if the decision had been made long before he stepped into her barn. His eyes held no cruelty, only a fierce, unmistakable concern, the kind that did not ask for permission. Evelyn's voice finally returned, thin and uncertain. She whispered a question she barely understood herself, a quiet tremor of disbelief. "Why?" The giant did not look away. Snow continued to melt along his skin, dripping onto the hay like falling stars. His answer was a breath, a simple truth delivered with the heavy certainty of someone accustomed to acting rather than explaining. "Tracks. Men near your home." Her stomach tightened. She had heard nothing, seen nothing, but he said it with a conviction she could not ignore. A warning. A promise. A choice placed at her feet. The barn felt smaller now, the winter colder, the shadows thicker. Outside, the wind rose in a long mournful sigh, and Evelyn realized with a sudden, startling clarity that the world was narrower than she believed. More dangerous. More fragile. She shivered despite herself. The giant did not reach for her. He simply waited. And when the next gust of wind rattled the walls, carrying with it the distant echo of footsteps that did not belong to him, Evelyn understood one final truth. She was not alone in the barn. And neither was he. Snow muffled the world as Evelyn stepped out of the barn, her breath rising like faint smoke in the icy dawn. The giant Apache walked ahead of her, leaving broad, deliberate footprints that cut through the untouched white. He did not look back to see if she followed. Somehow, he did not need to. Something in the steady rhythm of his stride told her he already knew she would. Perhaps he sensed fear pressed into her ribs like a second heartbeat. Perhaps he understood loneliness better than she ever could. Or perhaps he simply moved with the certainty of a man who trusted the wind to carry its own warnings. She clutched a small satchel to her chest, the only belongings she dared to take. Nathan's pocket Bible, a faded ribbon, a small tin of matches, and a single loaf of hardened bread. It felt pitiful in her hands. A life condensed into scraps. Yet it was all she could carry without slowing him. She didn't know where he was leading her, only that each step away from the homestead felt like stepping out of an old ache and into another kind of unknown. The cold bit at her cheeks as they walked, the air sharp enough to sting. She studied the tracks he warned her about, half buried near the fence line. Fresh impressions, too deep, too numerous, circling the property like wolves testing prey. She hadn't noticed them earlier, but now they seemed unmistakable. Whoever they belonged to had not come for conversation. A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the wind. The giant paused at the edge of the property and scanned the horizon, the kind of slow, attentive search a man performed only when he knew danger intimately. Evelyn watched the tension coil through his shoulders. Not fear but readiness. He turned his head slightly, listening. The world answered with nothing but the hush of falling snow. Satisfied, he resumed the path, and she followed once more. Hours passed beneath the broad open sky, the clouds low and gray. Yet Evelyn found herself oddly steady beside him. His silence was not cold. It was simply a different kind of language, one shaped by observation rather than noise. She noticed the way he moved around patches of frozen earth so she wouldn't slip, how he angled his body to take the brunt of the wind, how he slowed ever so slightly whenever her breathing labored. These small, wordless gestures told her far more about him than any speech. Nathan had been gentle, but gentle in fragile ways. He had feared storms, feared sickness, feared being unliked. This man, this stranger, feared nothing she could name. And yet there was a softness in his awareness, a consideration that felt startling. As if he had learned strength not to dominate but to defend. When her legs trembled, he finally spoke, his voice rough as the bark of old cedar. "We rest." Not a suggestion. Not a command for his sake. A recognition of her limits. They stopped beside a fallen log where snow had not yet gathered. Evelyn sat, pulling her shawl tighter around her. He remained standing, scanning the trees with the patience of a man who understood that danger often waited for exhaustion to settle before it struck. The silence stretched, steady and deep, until she found her voice slipping into it like a thread. "Why help me?" Her question sounded smaller than she intended, almost brittle. She wasn't sure whether she wanted truth or comfort. She wasn't sure the two could coexist. He answered without turning. "Winter takes those alone." The words struck something tender inside her, something she had kept buried beneath grief and practicality. Nathan had been taken by sickness, but loneliness had taken her long before. The giant resumed walking, and she rose to follow, warmed more by his simple acknowledgement than by the sun hidden behind the clouds. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, the horizon stretched open into a valley carved by ancient rivers. Snow dusted the pines, their branches drooping under its weight. Ravens perched high above, calling out warnings or greetings. Evelyn wasn't sure. The giant moved with the quiet confidence of someone returning to familiar ground. By the time they reached his camp, dusk brushed the sky in muted purple. Smoke lifted from a small stone-lined fire pit. The shelter he led her to was built from interwoven branches and hides, sturdy against the wind, warmed from within. It was simple but not crude, shaped by capable hands. Everything about it seemed intentional, cared for, lived in. A place that held stories without needing to speak them. He gestured for her to enter first. Inside, she found furs arranged neatly, a wooden bowl carved with spiraling patterns, and a pile of dried herbs tied with sinew. It smelled faintly of smoke, pine, and the earthy scent of someone accustomed to the land rather than walls. She knelt beside the fire as he added more wood, the flames brightening into lively gold. Their warmth reached her gradually, thawing her fingers, loosening the stiffness in her shoulders. She hadn't realized how cold she had become. He sat across from her, legs crossed, gaze steady. She felt the weight of it, but not in a threatening way. It was observational, curious, as if he were trying to read the story etched into her posture. She wondered what he saw. A widow too thin for winter. A woman holding herself together with threadbare resolve. Someone more ghost than flesh. To distract herself, she traced patterns in the dirt floor. She spoke quietly, not intending confession, but the fire's gentle crackle loosened her restraint. "My husband passed in autumn. Fever. We had so few supplies left. I thought I could make it through winter alone." He listened without interruption. Not with pity. Something deeper, something steady and accepting. After a long moment, he placed a small wooden carving on the ground between them. A bird with outstretched wings. "Loss flies with us until we let it land." The words were simple, but they wrapped around her like warmth. She touched the carving gently, surprised by the smoothness, the care. It felt like a gift, though she didn't understand why he offered it. Before she could speak again, he lifted his head sharply. His eyes narrowed, alert. Evelyn's heart paused, breath-catching. The fire flickered. Outside, somewhere beyond the shelter, a branch snapped under a weight not belonging to wind. He rose swiftly, silent as a shadow. "Tracks find us even here." Night held the forest in a breathless stillness as Dakota slipped from the shelter, his form merging with shadow and pine. Evelyn stayed kneeling by the fire, hands curled around the wooden bird he had carved, her pulse beating a frightened rhythm against her ribs. She strained to hear beyond the crackle of flames, searching the dark for movement. The branch she'd heard earlier might have been a deer, a drifting gust, even her own imagination stretched thin by exhaustion. Yet Dakota did not move like a man chasing ghosts. He moved like someone who knew the difference between wind and warning. Seconds stretched, taut and thin. Snow fell in soft, unbroken sheets, settling on the ground without a whisper. Evelyn leaned closer to the shelter opening, her breath fogging in the cold. She caught sight of Dakota's outline, broad shoulders, steady posture, every muscle alert. His silence was not fear. It was calculation. When he returned to the fire, his steps were controlled, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. His gaze drifted to the entrance again before meeting hers. She waited for an explanation, but he did not offer one. Instead, he fed another log into the flames, letting sparks dance upward like tiny fleeing stars. "You heard it too," she whispered. He nodded once. "Not animal. Not storm." The unspoken answer tightened her throat. She had lived near lawmen long enough to recognize the sound of boots on frozen branches. Familiar. Heavy. Intentional. Whoever had come this far into the winter woods was not wandering. Dakota stretched the hide flap over the entrance, sealing them in the muted glow of the fire. Evelyn watched his careful movements, the way he placed himself subtly between her and the opening. She felt the quiet protection in that gesture, and something inside her softened, trembling like a thawing river. As the hours slipped by, they spoke little. She shared stories without meaning to, small threads of memory unraveling in the warmth. Nathan fixing the roof every spring. The way the town women whispered behind gloved hands about her youth, her solitude. The nights she had cried into the quilt, hoping winter would be kinder than life had been. Dakota listened with the patience of someone accustomed to carrying other people's truths. His eyes, dark and steady, reflected firelight like coals held deep within the earth. When she faltered, he offered only presence. It was enough. He eventually spoke, voice low and rooted. Men in the valley. 3. Maybe 4. Not far. Her breath hitched. Lawmen? Thieves? Something worse? She imagined Marshall Tate's stern face, imagined Jonas Reddick whispering lies in the saloon, imagined the kind of men who prowled winter roads seeking whatever they could take from the vulnerable. Her gaze drifted to the shelter's faint seams. This tiny refuge felt suddenly fragile, as if one strong gust could tear it open. But Dakota did not appear shaken. He simply watched the fire, considering. When he finally lifted his eyes, the decision in them was clear. In the morning, we move. Evelyn's stomach sank. Move where? How far? Would running only feed whatever rumors already lived beyond the ridge? She almost voiced her worry, but Dakota's expression softened before she could shape the words. Not from fear, he said quietly. From wisdom. Storm coming. And men chase tired prey. The phrasing sent a chill through her. Not because he spoke of her as prey, but because the truth of it rang too clearly. She had been hunted by loneliness, by hardship, by winter itself. Now men added their shadows to her trail. She had no strength left to run alone. And he knew it. When dawn finally washed across the sky in muted lavender, they left the shelter behind. The valley stretched wide, blanketed in snow that glimmered like crushed pearl. Dakota carried most of the supplies, giving Evelyn only a small pouch of herbs. She protested weakly, but he shook his head with a sternness softened by understanding. The land is not gentle today. They traveled through the quiet wilderness, footsteps muffled, breath fogging in pale clouds. The cold bit at Evelyn's lungs, yet she found steady comfort in his presence beside her. He matched his pace to hers without comment, but she sensed him watching from the corner of his eye, gauging every tremor of fatigue. As they climbed a ridge, Dakota suddenly raised a hand. Evelyn froze. Below them, moving through the trees, were riders, 4 men, hunched against the cold. She recognized one in an instant. Marshall Tate's rigid posture, his coat lined with authority and worn judgment. Her mouth went dry. They searched her homestead. They would assume the worst. A widow missing in winter. Tracks leading away. And an Apache nearby. She imagined Tate's mind stitching the pieces into a narrative that left no room for truth. Dakota guided her behind a thicket, crouching low. His breath warmed the air near her ear as he spoke barely above silence. They think I took you. The words carried no bitterness. Only weary certainty, shaped by years of misunderstanding. Evelyn felt something fierce rise inside her, something that tasted of injustice and courage she didn't know she possessed. You saved me, she whispered. You're the only reason I'm alive. Dakota did not respond, but his gaze flickered with something she couldn't decipher. Surprise, maybe. Or gratitude. Or the dawning realization that she saw him differently than the world had taught him to expect. The riders paused near the base of the ridge. One dismounted, examining the snow, pointing toward the trail Dakota and Evelyn had taken. She felt panic creep up her spine. They would find them. And if they did, the truth might not matter. Dakota placed a hand gently on her back, not urging her to flee, but grounding her. His touch carried steadiness, calm, reassurance. She exhaled, breath trembling. After the riders moved west, following a false echo in the terrain, Takoda motioned for her to follow him toward a narrow ravine. Its walls were steep but protective, carved by ancient water into a sanctuary hidden from all but those who belonged to the land. As they descended into the ravine's quiet embrace, Evelyn felt her heart steady. But fear lingered, sharp and undeniable. How long could they keep ahead of suspicion? How far could winter carry them before conflict forced its hand? When they reached a sheltered ledge overlooking frozen pools, Takoda finally spoke, voice roughened by truth. Men chase shadows. But they will find flesh soon enough. Evelyn swallowed hard. She knew he meant himself. And she knew what lawmen did to men who did not fit their stories. Before she could answer, a gunshot echoed through the valley. Sharp, echoing, too close to be a warning. Takoda's eyes snapped to hers, filled with urgency. They found a trail after all. The gunshot rolled through the valley like a crack in the sky, its echo bouncing off the ravine walls before dissolving into the winter air. Evelyn froze, her breath folding into silence as snow drifted in soft spirals around her. Takoda stood poised at the ledge, body angled toward the sound, eyes sharpening with the urgency of someone who had lived too long on the edge between danger and survival. For a moment he did not move. He simply listened, every sense reaching into the distance. Then he turned back to her with a quiet resolve that tightened something deep inside her chest. "We cannot stay," he murmured, voice steadier than the wind. But his eyes, dark, knowing, held a different truth. He did not want her to run again, not like prey fleeing through the cold. His expression carried something gentler. Something she had not earned but somehow been given. Evelyn stepped closer, her breath warming the small space between them. "If they come, they will think you took me. That I was stolen." Her voice wavered, not from fear, but from the unbearable thought of him being hunted because of her. The world had always been quick to see what it wanted, never what was true. Takoda's gaze softened, the hardness in his posture loosening. "I would not let harm reach you. I will not regret that." The words struck her like a sudden thaw. They were simple, steady, spoken as if protecting her was as natural as breathing. She swallowed a tremor, and looked toward the valley where lawmen searched for traces. Snow masked their movements for now, but time thinned around them like cracked ice. Takoda motioned for her to follow him deeper into the ravine. The narrow path curved between jagged stones, the walls rising like ancient guardians. As they walked, the world quieted, muted by the snow and the weight of everything unspoken. Evelyn's steps faltered from exhaustion, but each time she slowed, Takoda eased his pace without turning. He did not announce his attentiveness. He simply shaped his movements around hers with patient instinct. When they reached a sheltered alcove carved by old water, he finally stopped. The space was small, warmed only by the natural stone's lingering heat. Evelyn sank onto a flat rock, breathing heavily. Takoda remained standing for a long moment, watching the entrance, listening for pursuit. Only when the wind settled into its steady whisper did he relax enough to sit across from her. She studied the tension carved into his features, the quiet strength that never seemed to crack. But beneath it, she sensed a deeper ache, an old solitude that mirrored her own. She wondered who he had lost, what winters he had survived alone. Her voice softened as she reached for the words she had held back since the cold first began pressing into her bones. "You should leave me. If they find us together, they'll—" She trailed off, unable to speak the end aloud. She did not want to imagine men dragging him away. Did not want to imagine herself returned to her empty home, her empty life. Takoda shook his head slowly. His hair brushed his shoulders like a dark curtain of quiet strength. "I will not leave you to winter. Or to men who do not see." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze steady. "You are not a burden. You are a life worth guarding." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said such words to her. Nathan had cared for her, but gently, cautiously, always uncertain of the world's demands. And others saw her as delicate, breakable, someone to pity rather than stand beside. But Takoda saw something different. Strength, perhaps. Or determination woven through her grief. She felt the weight of his belief settle into her chest like warmth. The silence between them grew thick with unspoken truths. Evelyn reached into her satchel and pulled out the small wooden bird he had given her. Its wings caught the firelight, glowing as if ready to rise. She traced its curves with her thumb, feeling each careful carving. Her voice trembled when she spoke again. "Why give this to me?" Dakota studied the carving, his expression softening. "When the world takes much, we forget our own flight." His gaze lifted to meet hers. "I hoped you would remember." Something in her heart loosened, breaking and mending all at once. She had never known a man who spoke in metaphors shaped by earth and spirit. A man who saw not her fragility but her resilience. Heat pooled behind her eyes. She blinked it back. A sudden rustle echoed through the alcove, and Dakota lifted a hand, signaling for silence. Evelyn held her breath as he leaned toward the narrow opening. Snow drifted harmlessly. No voices. No footsteps. The ravine held its breath with them. After a tense moment, he eased back, the danger passing like a shadow. Evelyn exhaled shakily. When he turned toward her again, something vulnerable flickered across his features. Something he rarely let the world see. "I have walked many winters alone," he murmured. "Too many." His voice thickened with memory. "My people once filled these valleys. Laughter, fire, stories. Now I am one of few who remain." He looked away, jaw tightening. Loss teaches a man to stand with no one. To expect nothing. To protect only what wind cannot take. Evelyn leaned forward, drawn by the raw honesty in his words. Her own voice emerged softer than snow settling on pine branches. "You protect because you care. That is not loneliness. That is heart." Dakota's eyes lifted to hers, holding a depth she had felt but not fully seen until now. In their quiet reflection she saw not just a warrior, but a man who carried grief like a second skin, who hid tenderness beneath armor forged by necessity. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying distant echoes, faint voices threading through the trees. Evelyn stiffened. Dakota rose to his full height, every sense sharpened. The world seemed to close in around them, uncertainty creeping through the narrow canyon like fog. Evelyn rose too, gripping the wooden bird tightly. Her fear no longer felt like something she faced alone. It braided with determination, with the fire Dakota's presence sparked in her. She stepped beside him, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "We face them together." Dakota's gaze flickered in surprise, then softened into something deeper, something fierce and warm. He nodded. Not as command. As agreement. As respect. Another sound carried through the ravine, closer now, undeniable. The search party had found their trail again. Their time had thinned to a fragile thread. Dakota placed one broad hand on the stone wall, bracing himself, preparing. Evelyn steadied her breath beside him. As the echo of boots drew nearer, he whispered a single truth that trembled through the cold air, a truth that held the weight of all he had not yet said. "They come. And this time, they will not leave without a reckoning." The echoes of boots deepened in the ravine, rising and falling like a heartbeat pressed against stone. Evelyn stood beside Dakota, her breath trembling but her spine straight, the wooden bird clutched firmly in her hand. Snow drifted in thin, uncertain spirals, as if even the winter hesitated to witness what would come next. Dakota placed one steady hand against the rock wall, grounding himself, grounding her, though neither spoke. Their silence felt like a vow. When the first shadow appeared at the mouth of the ravine, Evelyn's chest tightened. Marshal Tate stepped into view, his coat stiff with frost, his gaze sweeping the narrow passage with rigid determination. Behind him came three men, hunters of certainty, trackers of stories they had already decided were true. Their breath formed pale ghosts in the air. Their hands hovered near their guns. Tate's voice cut through the cold with a practiced authority. "Widowheart, step aside. We will take you home." His gaze hardened as it shifted to Dakota. "And he will answer for what he's done." Evelyn felt Dakota tense beside her, not with fear but with the burden of knowing how the world saw him. She reached for his arm, a gentle pressure, a reminder that he was not alone. The marshal's eyes flicked to the gesture, confusion crossing his expression. "I was not taken," Evelyn said, her voice clear despite the tremor stirring beneath it. "I walked with him. I chose to." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Tate's jaw tightened. Evelyn saw doubt flicker in him, as though he'd expected to find a trembling victim, not a woman standing with calm resolve beside the man they hunted. Evelyn stepped forward, lifting the wooden bird. She held it like a truth. This man protected me from a winter that would have taken me. From thieves who circled my land. From loneliness that nearly hollowed me out. Her tone softened. You're chasing the wrong danger. Tate hesitated, but pride dug into his shoulders. We received reports, rumors, he faltered. She had never seen him falter before. Jonas Reddick said. Jonas Reddick says many things, Evelyn replied. Words that warm his own pockets, not the truth. A long silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Snow whispered across the ground, gathering in soft drifts around their feet. The wind carried no verdict. It waited. Dakota finally stepped forward, slow, deliberate. He placed himself between Evelyn and the guns, towering like a mountain shaped by storms. If they would take blame, he offered himself for it. Not with surrender. No, he stood with a strength that invited understanding, not violence. I did not take her, he said, voice deep and low. His gaze locked with Tate's, unwavering. I saw danger. I did what any man would do. Any man with honor. Honor. The word hovered in the cold air. Evelyn felt it settle into her heart, warm and steady. The men shifted, uneasy with the way truth complicated their mission. Tate stared at Dakota for a long, heavy moment. He had known war. Known men who lied with steady eyes. And he knew this was not that. Before he could answer, a gust of wind tore through the ravine, scattering snow into frantic swirls. The sound of cracking ice echoed above them, a sharp, splitting groan. Evelyn glanced upward. A weighted shelf of snow clung precariously to the cliffside, trembling under the shifting cold. Dakota moved instantly. He lunged toward Evelyn, pulling her beneath the curve of the rock wall just as the snow shelf gave way. It crashed down in a roaring cascade, white fury thundering through the ravine. The men stumbled back, shouting as the world vanished into blinding white. Dakota shielded her with his body, one arm braced against the stone, the other holding her close, his warmth wrapping around her like the fiercest winter protection she had ever known. Snow engulfed the entrance, sealing them in muted silence. The world shrank to the rhythm of his breathing, the pounding of her heart against his chest, the sharp tang of pine and cold air. When the rumble faded, only a heavy stillness remained. Evelyn slowly lifted her head. Dakota's face was inches from hers, his eyes searching her for hurt he would not permit. She felt his breath against her cheek, warm and human and grounding. She whispered his name, not out of fear but out of something far deeper. He did not release her immediately. His hand on her back remained steady, his heartbeat strong beneath her palm. A shift passed between them, subtle, inevitable, like dawn melting frost. Finally he spoke, voice roughened by a truth he could no longer hold in silence. I could not bear to see you harmed. Her breath hitched. He had said many things with gestures, with silence, with simple acts of protection. But this was different, unhidden, vulnerable, unarmored. She lifted a trembling hand to his cheek, her thumb brushing the cold from his skin. Dakota, why? The question emerged not from doubt, but from a trembling wonder she could no longer contain. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if gathering courage from the ground beneath them, from the wind beyond the snow, from some memory of love long buried. When he spoke, his words were soft, shaped by something sacred. Because I have learned your strength, your sorrow, your courage. He breathed slowly, each word carrying the weight of revelation. You are no shadow to me. You are the fire at the edge of winter. And I have come to care for you with a heart I thought the world had taken from me. Her breath trembled. Tears warmed the corners of her eyes, falling onto his hand as she held him. The confession unfurled inside her like spring breaking beneath frost, tender and unstoppable. He loved her, not with haste, not with hunger, but with reverence and truth. She pressed her forehead to his, voice breaking open in a soft, trembling whisper. And I care for you. More than I ever thought I could again. The snow barrier thinned as daylight filtered through cracks, revealing silhouettes of men on the other side. Waiting, uncertain, no longer sure of the story they carried. Takota's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a certainty that felt like a promise. "Whatever comes next," he murmured, "we face it together." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart steady for the first time all winter. Outside, the snow began to slide from the entrance, light pushing its way through. The world had come for them. But they would step into it side by side.